Good morning. I'm Father Tom Malionik, and I'm the rector of St. Paul's Episcopal Church in Kinderhook, New York. Today is Tuesday, September 8th, and this is the 72nd installment of our morning musings. Thank you, welcome. Thank you for joining me here this morning. The morning musings, just briefly as I've been able to condense it, is a way for us to draw additional spiritual nourishment from the treasury of our church, whether it's our doctrines, our liturgy. It began as reflections on the readings for morning and evening prayer, mostly morning prayer since it happens right after morning prayer. But basically, it's just a forum. It's an opportunity for us to look at whatever might be helpful to us in becoming better disciples of Jesus Christ, whatever might be helpful to us in becoming more transparent icons of God in the world, so that when people look at us, they see through us to Jesus, and when they see Jesus, they see the Father. So there's got to be some good way that I can capture that in 25 words or less. But that's what we're here for. We're here to explore whatever will be helpful to us. And I'm happy to consider, if you have questions, if you have topics that are burning for you, or if you've encountered something in perhaps your reading or in your prayer, in the texts that we use in our liturgy for morning prayer, evening prayer, noonday prayer, compline, any of the structured hours of prayer of the day, anything like that. If you have questions, if it's just something, perhaps you're new to Christianity, perhaps you're curious and you want to know something more, let me know. Just put a question in the comments section, or there's a contact slide at the end. Get in touch somehow, and we'll see how we can possibly address that. I'm not. My one regret is that I'm just not going to be good at doing a live back and forth. So I'm happy to take ideas and sort of riff on them and do presentations for you. But I'm happy to talk with you one-on-one if you'd rather contact me that way and we can talk directly. I'm happy to do that as well. But in terms of managing both the technology and the content all at once, that's just a little more than I can handle. But I'm happy to, as I say, deal with, address any questions you might have or any ideas that you might think worthwhile. So by all means, please be in touch. So today we have again a continuation. We are back still in the book of Job. We have yesterday we heard the long speech by Elihu, or the beginning of Elihu's long diatribe, his long oration to Job and his friends, and his introduction to himself. He introduces himself. He talks about himself, and he talks about his why he has waited so long to speak up, and he's angry, and he's made no secret of the fact that he is angry because he thinks Job is going about things the wrong way, and Job's friends are going around things the wrong way, and they've got it all wrong, and he's going to set them straight. So he's going to give them his opinion, and so on. We don't get to hear that yet. Right now, we have gone back 2 chapters, 3 chapters in Job, back to the 29th chapter today, and we're going to hear for the next few days more of what Job has to say. Today, Job waxes nostalgic. He says, "Oh, I remember the good old days. I remember the days when God was good to me and all was right with the world, and I was respected because, doggone it, I did the right thing. I was upright and honest and generous and strong and courageous in upholding the right and justice. And I looked out for the widows and the orphans and the poor. People blessed me because I had rescued them from their difficulties. Even the powerful and the wise hushed themselves in order to listen to me speak. I had it all. I was great." And so he's rehearsing that whole thing. And of course, this is all a prelude to what God will say about that. But this is very much the way we behave when we are confronted with some kind of adversity. We start to say, well, why am I being singled out for this? Why? I was a good person. I'm a good person. This is something we hear a lot. I'm a good person. And so therefore nothing bad should happen to me. Certainly I should never be criticized. Certainly I should never, I should be allowed to be as good as I want to be, as good as I can be, and just leave it at that. And there's no sense in which I should be challenged to grow, or which I should be challenged to change, or perhaps even to reconsider my definitions of what makes goodness. We hear a lot of that, and part of that is, I think, because of what has happened with my generation, and beginning just shortly before it. I think my generation, that there was a great movement in the church. It was called, in the middle of the 20th century, it was a philosophical movement, not just in the church, but in the world. And it came on the heels of existentialism, the devastation of all of the wars, and all of the calamities of the 20th century, which seemed to kind of, 2020 is sort of giving it a run for its money, but nevertheless, all of the terrible suffering that came about in the 20th century led a lot of people to reject the idea that there was any intelligent God at work here. It recalled the early days of the Enlightenment, works by, for example, I'm going to get it wrong now. Was it Candide? Was that was Voltaire? Voltaire, who wrote Candide, and pilloried the idea of a church that proclaimed a good and loving and all-powerful God was in charge, when things like the Lisbon earthquake in the mid-18th century could happen, or that someone could be dying of a terminal illness, and so on. And how can we say that God is good? So as existentialism came around and said, no, meaning is what you make of it. You define things in your own terms. Words are what you mean them to mean, and not. There's no accepted common definition. And basically what that did was set the stage for a world in which it becomes increasingly difficult even to communicate, because we don't share the same meanings even for the words we use. And we don't take the time to sit down and talk to one another about our definitions. And we don't sit down and talk to one another about where those definitions come from, and where our perhaps differing approaches come from. So we argue about topics, we argue about causes and issues and vexed questions and so on up here. But what we're really differing on is way down here, is where I'm coming from, is why do I consider this to be an unassailable truth that I will not give in on? Why do I consider this to be the bedrock that would lead me to this conclusion, while you consider something else to be the bedrock assumptions about life, the universe, and everything that lead you to some other conclusion? So in the middle of the 20th century, there came to be that questioning again of how the church goes about proclaiming the good news, and it resulted in a movement that became known as the turn to the subject. The idea was that instead of starting with a presentation about God and then trying to argue over whether that God even exists, and so on, what that God is up to, what that God is doing or has done, and so on, we start with the subject. We start with the person. Instead of starting with the belief, we start with the believer. And this made a lot of sense. This kind of grabbed people where they lived, and a lot of people came to faith in God because they started first from, okay, well, where are you? The church started with, okay, so where are you? What do you believe? What do you think? What do you see? And it got us thinking about those assumptions, and it got us thinking about our bedrock beliefs, our axioms, the unquestioned, the unreasoned, the assumptions that we make. And that led to a lot of dynamism. There was a lot of energy unleashed by that, and a lot of good energy that was unleashed by that. But like all such movements, eventually it starts to play itself out, and as it gets down the road, Woody Allen said, that I ripen, I don't like to talk about maturity. I ripen and then I rot, basically. It was his, I think it was in Annie Hall. Anyway, so the idea is that eventually things ripen, but then they start to go bad. And what has happened now is that approach of validating the subjective, validating what is true for me or what I believe to be true. What I believe to be true now has come to mean what is true, and that all truth resides now no longer in any objective sense, but all truth is simply whatever the believer deems truth to be. And that has set the stage now. Instead of unleashing great energy for community and for the development of a mission to the world for the church to proclaim its truth, now the church itself is fragmented into factions, and ultimately we were fragmenting into factions of one. These are my truths. We might find other like-minded individuals on the internet. We might find them in Facebook groups. We might find them in our families, or we might not. We might find them in our churches, or we might not. But what we get is very small, tiny factions of people who barely manage to find the same things to believe in enough areas of life so that they can actually hang together as a community. But instead, we're really all arguing for my own interpretation, having every bit as much right as if you will, to be the dominant interpretation as anyone else's. So it is we're starting to see the decline, or starting to see the overdevelopment, the hypertrophy, and eventually disintegration of that turn to the subject. But it's leaving us in a time of chaos. So what has happened is we've got this turn to the subject, and Job is in that place. I'm a good person. I have done all the right things. And so therefore there must be something wrong, not with me, but with somebody else. And it's going to be somebody else's responsibility to fix it. It's going to be somebody else's responsibility to give me the kind of existence that I am entitled to, that I have a right to, that I believe is somehow divinely ordained. And ultimately what that really means is if you scratch the surface of that, what it really says is that we're all out to be able to define our own gods and worship our own gods. And the gods are the gods of our own appetites, our own desires, gods that do not require us to change, gods that make us, in fact, akin to God makers, and if God makers, then even superior to gods in a certain sense. If that makes any sense, because that's exactly what we're encountering in Acts today. Here we have Paul and Barnabas. They have come announcing this new doctrine, and it's a controversial doctrine. Some people latch right onto it, and they think this is great news, and other people think this is terrible. This is threatening our very way of life. This is threatening our existence. We can't allow this to happen, and so they find themselves caught in the crossfire between rival factions, the Jews. And again, they go first to the synagogues. That was their practice. They would always announce first to the Jews because that was Jesus's mission. Jesus came first to the Jews. Those were his people. He came to his own, and as the prologue to St. John's Gospel says, and his own received him not. But to those who did receive him, he gave power to become children of God. So Paul and Barnabas go to the Jews, but now they keep increasingly finding that is an inhospitable environment, that the Jewish community is starting to coalesce and to crystallize and to harden against the message that Jesus Christ, the one who was executed as a criminal by crucifixion in Jerusalem, not 2 decades earlier even, that Jesus Christ is the Messiah. That's something the Jewish community is beginning to crystallize and to harden against, until basically almost about 70 A.D. when everyone who does profess Jesus Christ to be the Messiah is expelled from the synagogue, can no longer be associated with the synagogue, and so a new movement of Jewish Christians who retain a lot of the traditions, the law of Moses. They still observe the law of Moses. There's a new tradition of Jewish Christians that arises, and there is a Jewish church, a Jewish Christian church in Jerusalem, and among the diaspora Jews, among the Jews that are scattered in other countries, whether they are Palestinian Jews who follow the ways and the traditions of Palestinian Judaism, or whether they are Jews who have spent their entire lives growing up in, say, the Roman Empire, the Greco-Roman world, and so have also picked up a lot of those ways, and who don't have, besides the Old Testament scriptures themselves and perhaps some of the observances of the law, nevertheless, are also influenced by Greek culture or Roman culture. And then the Gentiles themselves. So Paul and Barnabas have come, and they have announced this Jesus as the Messiah, and they have also, God has blessed that by, God has confirmed what they are preaching by allowing works, great works of power, works of miracles to be done at their hands. And what this leads the people of Lycaonia to conclude is that these are the gods. They've heard something about gods. They've heard something about a God who became human. They've heard something about, and they're seeing miracles. They're seeing works of power that they have not seen elsewhere. And so these must be the gods, their gods. And so they project onto them what they know. This is Zeus and this is Hermes, and they have come to be with us. And wow, this is great. Let's have a festival. Let's have a sacrifice. This is a great thing. Now, Paul and Barnabas, of course, are this is not what they have in mind. This is not what they're intending. It's not what they've been sent to do. And they tear their clothes. And that's a sign that they see in this misinterpretation of who they are. They see that not just as a misunderstanding. It's a blasphemy. It is idolatry. It is the worst possible perversion of the message. It is infidelity to the God who sent them. It's a terrible thing. And so they tear their clothes. That's the reaction to blasphemy, to someone who utters a statement that is not just untrue theologically, but that somehow is disgustingly untrue. It's terribly untrue. And so they tear their clothes and they run out to make a big deal of persuading these people, no, we're not gods. We're people. We're, men just like you. Elizabeth Bowman, a wonderful writer who writes for the Living Church. The Living Church has a series of daily meditations, they call it the daily devotional. If you there's a link to today's, and you should if you don't get the daily devotional in your email every morning, you should. It's a wonderful reflection on the readings from morning prayer or evening prayer. It's one of the texts for the day, and she writes a wonderful thing today about how Paul and Barnabas, in doing this, they sidestep the temptation to parlay this acclaim that they have from the people into some sort of utilitarian opportunity to do some good in the world. Well, here are some people who are wowed by us. Let's let them go on believing it for a while, and now we can do some good. We can start to. They respect us. They worship us. Let's accept that, and and then we have some power here, and we can use that power for good. And Elizabeth Bowman applauds them certainly for resisting that temptation. That's what we would do. It is what in fact the technologically advanced West did for many years among indigenous peoples during the age of exploration and colonization. The white man showed up with guns and various different kinds of gee whiz technology, even if it seems primitive to us in our day. Nevertheless, that it generates wonder and awe and amazement, and starts to become a means of exerting control and power. And whether you think you're using that power for good to bring civilization, for example, or whether you're simply using it for crass personal gain, nevertheless, it's still an abuse of what you have been given by God. And yet, for all that Elizabeth Bowman's meditation, it's a wonderful meditation. You should definitely read it. And again, subscribe to the daily devotionals; they're good. But the other side of this is that Paul and Barnabas, what they're encountering here from the Lycaonians is actually, it's closer to the truth than we might think. And that's precisely why it's so dangerous. It is very close to the truth, because they are there to announce the good news of a God who has come and walked among his people, the God who is with us, Emmanuel, right? And they have come to announce the even better news that this God has come to walk not just among the first chosen people, but men and women and children of every race and tongue, of every tribe and nation, of every ethnic group. That to any who believed in his name, he gave power to become children of God. So it's not that Paul and Barnabas are poo-pooing the idea that gods walk the earth in human form. It's just that they're not those gods. And that's the blasphemy. It's that it's not us. We're not here to talk about us. We're not here to be your heroes. We're not here to be your saviors. We're here to tell you about the one who is. They become, in their own day, the John the Baptists, the ones who go before the Lord to prepare his way, to announce the good news, and then to watch and see as the Holy Spirit descends on people and the light bulbs come on, and they recognize that in this Jesus they have everything they have ever hoped for and wanted, and more, and that this Jesus will lead them not only to the satisfaction of their hopes and desires, but through them and past them to something unimaginable. And that's how this movement of Christianity gets going. It is not because people get their needs met, because sometimes people don't get their needs met, even among the Christians. But what they do see is other possibilities. What they do see is a vision that goes beyond obsession with the immediate satisfaction of needs and desires. They see something that will take, not just perfect their world and their culture so that they can live comfortably in it for as long as they are alive, but something that will transcend and outlast their own ideas, even their own vision, their own understanding, that will transcend the values of their own society, however good those values may be, that will eventually so far blow those out of the water, not destructively, not in the sense of declaring them bad, but they will be bad insofar as we cling to those, like Job, who wants to go back to the good old days when when everything was right and I was a good person and that was enough. But rather people who will be now inspired to understand that goodness goodness keeps on going way out into the future, way out into a future past even the point of death. It keeps going, and Jesus keeps leading, and life keeps taking us to those places, into the very heart, the very center, the very core of God, where all that is true and all that is good and all that is holy and all that is righteous and all that is beautiful burns with this white hot intensity that purges out everything else. That's That's what they see. The people who come to actually recognize Jesus Christ as the Messiah. That's where they go. That's where they get taken. Now, it's going to take the church a while to formulate some of this. Right? We have the Lycaonians saying, oh, that the gods, Zeus and Hermes in their understanding, have come in the likeness of men. And what this meant was they saw Paul and Barnabas as essentially really gods who just happened to look like human beings. They were play acting, they were pretending, they were in costume, they were incognito, they were in disguise. They had the shape and the form of human beings, but they weren't really. And this is where the church had to wrestle with this for a long time. Was Jesus Christ, did he only seem to be a human being? Was he really just God and just happened to create for himself this sort of fleshly outer coating in much the same way that, in a science fiction movie or novel or story, right? Some being from another dimension would clothe itself in recognizable or palpable or perceptible human form in order to be able to interact with us mortals. Is that really what Jesus is? But wait a minute. No, we know his mother. We know she gave birth. That he was actually born of woman. There was a baby that came out in an umbilical cord that God cut, and who nursed at a woman's breast and grew up and had to be potty trained and all of this stuff. We know that this is part of why it's so hard to understand and accept for those early generations. It's so hard to get there, to come to a point of faith that this person who otherwise exhibits all of the same characteristics as human beings and who in every way is human, how can this person also be God? And part of that comes from our inability to live with mystery. We need it to be one or the other. We need God to be God, spirit out there, or material reality over here. And this is what I can see and I can touch and taste and hear and smell and so on. See, or perhaps even see just with instrumentation, but nevertheless that there's material reality here, and then there's God and spirit out there, and really never the twain shall meet. They kind of visit each other every so often, but that's about all there is. And ultimately we snap back into our two-tiered universe in which there is a hard dividing line between matter and spirit. But Jesus Christ breaks that. Jesus Christ comes to deliver the truth that no, those two worlds coexist everywhere at the same time, at all times. It's no vacillating back and forth between the sacred and the profane. That there are things that are set aside, certainly, among the profane things that are set aside for sacred purposes, but that the sacred and the profane are locked together inextricably. They can't be teased apart, not by any process of refinement, chemical, physical, whatever. It's not like smelting, gold from ore, or iron from ore. Right? It's not. There's no way to actually separate them. So what it will take the church the better part of 400 years to come to the point of being able to find a formulation that does this, and it will not be the formulation that the Lycaonians come up with. They say, the gods have come in human likeness. And at the Council of Chalcedon, which put into final form the words of a creed that had begun some 125 years before, I guess, some 100 years before, what we call the Nicene Creed, the Council of Nicaea, formulated a creed, and the Council of Chalcedon finally added language to it that would express as the faith that we are supposed to hold and hand on Not that we can wrap our heads around it, but that we're supposed to hold on to and pass along for future generations so that they have that touchstone and do not fall into the Lycaonian mistake of thinking that Jesus Christ even is just pretending to be human, that he wasn't really one like us. So in 451, the Council of Chalcedon issues this Nicene Chalcedonian Creed with the words that say that Jesus is of one being with the Father. He has the same substance as the Father, and substance doesn't here mean physical matter necessarily, but he has the same kind of existence. There's no, if you were to put Jesus and his Father together, you couldn't tell which was which, in terms of kind of what they are. Again, made out of is language that smacks of materialism, and it's not that. Nor is it energy. It's not matter and energy either. Energy and spirit are not the same thing. Energy is still part of the created world. Energy is still part of the created universe. God is not energy. God creates energy just as God creates matter, and as Albert Einstein has so helpfully told us, matter and energy are interchangeable, but they're not God. So Jesus is of the same substance. He has the same kind of existence. Indeed, the very same existence that the Father has. He is begotten of the Father, and that's the strange part. He can be begotten. There's not quite an equality between Father and Son. There's a relationship, an intimate relationship. It's a relationship of heredity, in the same way that any one of us inherits DNA from our mother and father. We share some of that material. We have that material passed on, and yet we have a separate existence. And yet we can look and we can take a tiny snip out of a cell in our bodies and find the same snip in the body of an ancestor hundreds of generations before. Right? That's that kind of identity of essence, that kind of identity of being. We heard this last night, actually, in the reading from John's Gospel at evening prayer, which is, it concludes with Jesus telling people, the Father and I are one. Right? I am the Messiah. I come from the Father. You just don't believe it. The Father and I are one, and they don't believe it because they're thinking, again, in terms of this two-tiered universe. And you can be one, you can be God, or you can be human, but you can't be both. And Jesus comes to say that, you know what? Human beings are created in the image and likeness of God, and God has reached down into the stuff of humanity, the exalted breathing clay of humanity, and put his own spirit into it. And that's what makes us alive. It is the fact that we breathe not only oxygen and nitrogen and a few other gases, but that we breathe the very life of God. Man does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God, that every word that is spoken by God is a breath breathed out and breathed into us. And it is that breath that is life. The word for breath and spirit, the same in Hebrew, the same in Greek, ruach in Hebrew, pneuma in Greek, the same word. Breath and life are interchangeable. They are the same. And it is life not only, again, in the sense of physical metabolism. It is life in the sense of an existence. A being that has a being and an existence that is not limited to its fleshly incarnation here. So as I say, it would take the church 450 years to come to this Chalcedonian formulation, right? That Jesus Christ is of one being, has the same substance. If you look in the Book of Common Prayer, page about 850, somewhere in there, you will find something called the Athanasian Creed. And Athanasius was one of the bishops at the Council of Chalcedon. He was one of the foremost proponents of this language that Jesus Christ is not of a like being with the Father. He doesn't have similarities to the Father. He is not of a similar nature to the Father. He is not, in Greek, homoiousios, which is the same word that the Lycaonians use, right? The gods have come in a form that is homoi, similar to that of human beings, but rather homoousios, of the same substance, the same kind of existence, the same. Words fail. Right? Athanasius was one of the big proponents of that language, and he began to see that. And he was opposed. I mean, this was not a consensus that was shared universally. There were a great many bishops, first and foremost among whom was a guy named Arius. And Arius could not accept this. Arius had a much more commonsensical approach. He had an approach that was much easier to understand. It was easier to explain. He didn't think it did any harm to the truth of what Christianity was all about. So instead, he said that no, that Jesus was similar to the Father in a great many ways. He had a similar kind of being, a similar kind of existence, but he was not God in the same way that the Father is God, because he didn't always exist. He came into being. There was Athanasius' famous statement is, there was a time when he was not. There was a time when before this God the Son existed, that Jesus Christ was a human being created. At what point he was endowed with godhood is open to a variety of different presentations, but the idea being that there was not this idea that he was eternally begotten from the Father, that he was always God from the same, co-eternal is another phrase that's used. I mentioned in the prayer book, there's something called the Athanasian Creed. It spells this out in excruciating detail, and very well, actually. It used to be recited traditionally on Trinity Sunday, precisely to get that point across. This is the mystery of the Trinity. Three gods, but not three gods, but one God in three persons. Not one God, but three persons, and so on. It's a wonderful thing that not three co-eternals, but one co-eternal, and yet nevertheless the three persons. Check it out in the prayer book. Look online if you don't have a hard copy of the prayer book. Athanasian Creed. It is a great thing. So anyway, so Arius comes and he says that Jesus is like the Father in being, has a similar being to the Father, but not the same, and that he came by this at some time later than since all eternity. Well, this has an implication in the way we talk about the mother of Jesus. And our Orthodox brethren, our Orthodox brothers and sisters who are who follow what they call the new calendar, the contemporary calendar, the Gregorian calendar that we use in secular life, they are observing today the nativity of the Virgin Mary, the birth of Mary, and while for many folks from a Protestant tradition that feels a little creepy, they don't like the idea of giving Mary much attention beyond the fact that she gave birth to Jesus. Certainly not by giving her any sort of encouragement to think of herself as special or different. But nevertheless, our Orthodox brothers and sisters are celebrating the Nativity of Mary. I've got a couple of really good artistic representations of that I'll demonstrate to you here. There's beautiful portrayals of Mary's birth. By tradition, her parents' names were Joachim and Anna, and they and just as in the Orthodox, and by Orthodox I mean not big O Orthodox as in Byzantine, but little O Orthodox as in those who believe the faith as it was articulated as the true faith by the Council of Chalcedon, ultimately in the Creed. So for all who believe those truths in that way, for those people are the Orthodox, and for Orthodox Christians, Mary is not just the mother of Jesus. She's not just the mother of a physical man, Jesus, son of somebody, right? Mary will go through her entire life claiming that he is the Son of God. Joseph was just his foster father, and she will go on and be known as not just Mary, the mother of Jesus, but Mary, the mother of God. And that title also gets called into question. If you follow Arius's reasoning, Mary cannot be the mother of God. She can only be the mother of Jesus. Whereas if you follow the Orthodox teaching, then Mary is not just the mother of Jesus, but also the mother of God, because Jesus has always been God, and was God long before his physical body was conceived in Mary's womb. It's not just about, I just want to clear up one common misunderstanding. The Immaculate Conception. The Immaculate Conception does not mean that Jesus was conceived without the benefit of the usual human means of procreation. Right. We as Christians, most of us don't have a whole lot of problem with at least the idea that the Holy Spirit came to Mary, and that somehow, because it was this interaction of God with matter, which is not beyond the realm of possibility or plausibility for Christians, that God does interact directly with the material universe, that a human being could be conceived in the womb of a woman without the benefit of an intermediary in the form of a male human being. As much that's how I'm going to put it. So Mary is the mother of God, not just of Jesus here. The Immaculate Conception refers to the fact that as time went on and people began to consider, what does this mean, that Mary is the mother of God? Could Mary have been the mother of God? Could she have, in fact, raised Jesus? Could she have been the mother of Jesus in such a way that Jesus turned out okay if Mary herself had been, like all human beings, completely, particularly in the Reformation formulation, totally depraved? In other words, she had no good in her. This was before the time of Jesus. It was before Jesus died on the cross, and so on. How could it be that Mary could even carry in her womb the purity, the white hot purity of God, when she herself was a corrupt human being, prone to sin, and so on? So the one of the explanations that was mooted about and was widely accepted, it was widely accepted, was the idea that Mary was in fact conceived immaculate, that she herself was conceived without having inherited original sin, that unlike other human beings, she did not have original sin. Now, this became a bone of contention between the Roman Catholic Church and Protestantism, and for that matter, the Orthodox, because the Orthodox don't have a doctrine of original sin. But the Augustinian version, by which original sin is passed on through the processes of natural birth, and again, not Augustine thought it was actually sex that did it, but the idea being that just simply being born means that we have inherited a lifelong predisposition, a species-long disposition to rebel and to sin. And the idea was that Mary was somehow singled out, that she was kept apart, she was made special, she was considered a special vessel, and so as a result, she was preserved from the effects of that, so that she could carry out this role. Now, whatever you think of that doctrine, the Roman Catholic Church defined it as a dogma very late indeed. It was not until 1870 that the Immaculate Conception was defined as a dogma. In other words, something that had to be believed in order to be to consider yourself, in order to be considered an adherent to the true faith in its entirety, in its totality. That was a perhaps unfortunate thing to have happen, but people had believed that long before, and not just Roman Catholics, not just people who followed the Roman way since the Reformation. It was a widely held belief. Thomas Aquinas actually did not like the doctrine originally, and came into and a shadow kind of fell over his orthodoxy because of his resistance and his opposition to it. But he ultimately did wind up being able to find a way to accept that. But the idea is, the Immaculate Conception doesn't mean Mary's virginity or the virgin conception of Jesus, and it doesn't mean her perpetual virginity, whatever you think of that. We're not going to go there today. But what it does mean is that she becomes the mother of God. And in the Orthodox tradition, that makes her parents, Joachim and Anna, the grandparents of God. And that's how they're referred to. It's a wonderful doctrine that God has grandparents. I think that's just great. What this does is these doctrines, right, for as much as they probably, you don't have to hold them in that form in order to have a saving faith in Jesus Christ, in order to find yourself on the path of life, and a follower of Jesus who can be led and taken onward into eternal life. That nevertheless they help to guard the doctrines that do. They help to guard the doctrine, and I know, some folks say, well, doctrines don't save people. And that's true. But there are many people who are saved who ultimately wind up, if you believe that salvation can be lost, who ultimately wind up at least not being able to enjoy it, because they don't have the doctrinal framework in which to situate that, so that they can hold on to and pass along this faith, the saving parts of the faith. It needs a container of sorts. These are container doctrines. They're second-tier doctrines. They're things that protect the central core of the faith. What it protects against is precisely what Arius was proposing, and what Athanasius, the defender of orthodoxy, of Chalcedonian orthodoxy, of the same being as the Father, what Arius was proposing, which is a form of a heresy, a Christological heresy. And if you, I've put a link to a book by Fitzsimmons Allison called "The Cruelty of Heresy," and why these, not only what the false beliefs or the wrong beliefs or the errors are that lead us not to be able to really follow Christ wholeheartedly and reliably and confidently, but that get in our way and lead us down paths that will ultimately take us away from the path of life. There are basically two mistakes that we can make in understanding who Jesus is as this amalgam of divine and human, of truly divine and truly human. One mistake, and they're both much easier to understand than the mystery. Okay, that's the thing. We have to carry a mystery. We have to carry and pass on something we don't understand, that we can't wrap our heads around, that we can't really even accept. That's why the church holds on to faith that we cannot personally hold on to. But we, by our participation in the work of the church and the vocation and the mission of the church, continue to pass this on from generation to generation, so that it can continue to have its saving effect for generations to come. The two mistakes that we make about the nature of Jesus Christ is, one, adoptionism, so that he wasn't always, he's really human. He starts out human. He's basically human. He's fundamentally human. And then he just sort of gets exalted to divine status, sort of like Hercules was in Greek mythology, right? The idea is that you can become a god if you're good enough, or you can become a god if the gods take a shine to you and decide to invite you up to Olympus, right? But that basically you start out as a human being, and that's your fundamental nature, and then this divinity is overlaid onto that. There was a lot of speculation about this in the last 2 centuries. We have books like The Jesus of History and The Christ of Faith. The idea that Jesus Christ was just a man, but that later the apostles sort of worked him up into this mythical figure who who has divine characteristics and properties. But the real truth is that he's just a human being, just like us, just like, or for that matter, just like Muhammad or Buddha or anybody else. That that's adoptionism. And that's one mistake that we can make, because it doesn't give us that hope that the sacrifice of Jesus was any better than any other sacrifice, that the sacrifice of Jesus on the cross could have an effect beyond what any noble death might produce, but that this has a fundamental effect on our relationship as a species and us as individual representatives of that species to God. The other error that gets made is called docetism. It comes from the Latin word meaning to seem, docere, to the Greek and Latin words to show, to appear. And docetism says that Jesus wasn't really human, that he was just God walking around in a meat suit, if you will, but that he was really God all along, never was anything else. And so he only seemed to be human. He only appeared to be human. Those two, Fitzsimmons Allison has a great explanation. And of all the varieties of these things get embellished all kinds of different ways. But the whole point of all of this is that Jesus is one and the same, and that the Father and I are one, and that Paul and Barnabas announce the good news of God, but they are not God. That they're not. That's the, it's not easy for us even to accept the burden of having to know and remember, memorize, recite, rehearse these doctrines over and over again as we recite the creeds, over and over again as we use them liturgically in our prayers. But nevertheless, it is somehow important to the mission of the church. It is important to the effectiveness of what Jesus Christ did for us to be able to pass those truths on. There's a limited number of them, and they are profound mysteries. Ultimately, actually, it's those who get more into their heads that have the greatest trouble. Children have no problem with this whatsoever. None. They have no problem believing that Jesus Christ to be truly God, truly human, truly completely human consciousness, able to be tempted, feels pain, really feels pain, knows joy, eats, drinks, is merry, all of that stuff, cries, weeps over Jerusalem, feels tenderness towards people, feels compassion, and can actually be put to death, and can actually rise again, not as a God liberated from the limitations of flesh, but actually rise again in the flesh. And that's what gives us the hope. It's that fact that Jesus Christ is both divine, and so therefore his teaching is reliable and trustworthy and true, as he himself says over and over again. I'm not telling you something that I'm making up on my own here. This is what I hear from the lips of God, my Father. I'm just repeating to you what God has always said. That's what I'm doing. So his teaching is trustworthy. He is divine. He deserves our worship. He deserves our adoration. He deserves our obedience. He deserves to deserve, meaning we owe him our love. We owe him everything. We owe him our lives. We owe him our very existence. We owe him every possible gift that we ourselves have been given. We owe to him. They are his. All that we have, all that we are, is his. And all of this, again, because we're able to even articulate all of this because at some point folks stood up and say, no, he was both truly God and truly human. He didn't just seem to be human. He was truly human, and he was also truly divine. Mary was the mother not only of Jesus Christ, a human being, but the mother of God. Joachim and Anna are God's grandparents. And so today we celebrate Mary's nativity, and I think with great joy. So, of course, there's lots of things that could be said. There's lots of arguments back and forth on both sides. I am not well versed. I grew up Roman Catholic. I don't have any problem with Mary, and I don't think of her in the same way as I think of God, but I think she deserves a lot of respect, and I believe that we can honor her liturgically, and I believe that we can interact with her in the same way that we interact with anyone who has been touched and graced by God and who lives now with God and serves in the presence of God, and who continues to have a vocation and a mission with the church. So I don't have a problem with any of that, and I know other folks do, and there's lots to be said. And if you like, we can try to explore some of that. I've given you a link to a recent book by Brant Pitre, great theologian who does a lot about the relationship of the life of Jesus and Judaism. And here he's got a book on Jesus and what is it? Jesus and where is it? I had it. Jesus and the Jewish roots of Mary. There's a link to it in the. Oh, you can't see it because I have been talking over this. I'm sorry. I've been talking over this graphic. See, this is why I can't do things live. Jesus and the Jewish roots of Mary, and it's a great book. It'll tell you a lot that I can only hint at. So you might want to take a look at that, and there are a bunch of others. If you want some other references, I can give you those as well. I'm going to leave it there for today, and thank you for joining us. Thank you for being with me today and for listening. I will be back, God willing, at 5 o'clock for evening prayer, and I hope you can join us, if not live, at least at some point, to pray with us as our virtual church. So I pray in the meantime that God will bless and keep you well and safe, fill you with every good grace and blessing until we meet again.